The Arizona sun was a merciless hammer, beating down on the scorched earth until the very air shimmered with heat. Inside the rocking stagecoach, the world was a cacophony of groaning leather rattling wood and the rhythmic plodding of 4 tired horses. Jake sat shotgun, his Winchester resting across his lap, his knuckles white. His face etched with lines that told of too much sun and too little sleep was a mask of grim vigilance. He was a sentinel guarding a fragile bubble of civilization as it moved through a land that had never been tamed. Inside, a woman fanned her flushed face, while her daughter, a girl of no more than 10 named Elira, stared out at the monolithic red rock formations that clawed at the cobalt sky. A silver locket, intricate and delicate, lay against the collar of her simple dress. She would occasionally touch it, a small, unconscious gesture of comfort. Jake's gaze kept drifting to it, a flicker of unease stirring in his gut. He'd learned long ago that pretty things rarely survived out here. The driver, a portly man named Silas, with a mustache stained by tobacco, spat a brown stream into the dust. Quiet today, he grunted his eyes, scanning the narrow canyon pass ahead. Too quiet. Jake didn't answer. He knew that quiet. It was the breathless pause before a storm and the silence of a predator about to strike. His hand tightened on the rifle. The feeling was a familiar ghost, a cold dread that lived permanently in the pit of his stomach. It was the same feeling he'd had 5 years ago in the crowded streets of St. Louis, a moment before his world had shattered. The memory rose unbidden. On the press of the crowd, the smell of rain on hot cobblestones, a child's laughter. A man's angry shout, the glint of steel. He had drawn his Colt, a legend in his hand, the peacemaker that had ended a dozen duels. He had been so sure so fast. But the crowd had surged a panicked wave, and his shot. A sharp crack echoed through the canyon, splintering the air and Jake's memory. It wasn't a rifle. It was a rock slide, small but deliberate, clattering down the canyon wall and blocking the path ahead. Silas cursed, pulling hard on the reins. The horses whinnied, their eyes wide with panic, as the coach skidded to a halt in a cloud of ochre dust. "Ambush," Silas yelled, fumbling for the pistol at his hip. They appeared as if summoned from the rock itself. 4 riders, their faces obscured by grimy bandanas, rifles leveled. They were lean and hungry vultures circling a kill. The box, one of them snarled, his voice a gravelly rasp. "And any valuables you got, be quick about it." Jake's training took over. The guilt, the memories, they receded into a cold, professional calm. He raised the Winchester at stock, fitting into the familiar groove of his shoulder. He sighted on the leader, his finger tightening on the trigger. He could drop the man before he even knew what was happening. It was what he was paid for. It was what he was good at. But as he looked down the barrel, the outlaw's dark eyes met his, and for a split second the world dissolved. It wasn't the canyon anymore. It was St. Louis. The outlaw's face blurred, replaced by another, the face of a man named Donovan. His eyes wide with shock and disbelief in the instant before Jake's bullet had struck him down. A bystander, an innocent man caught in the crossfire. A life extinguished by Jake's mistake. The flashback was a physical blow, a phantom hand squeezing his heart. He froze, a fraction of a second, an eternity. The world rushed back in a blur of motion and sound. The outlaw, seeing his hesitation, seized the moment. He fired. The shot wasn't for Jake. It was for the horses. One of the lead animals screamed a terrifying human sound and collapsed in a tangle of leather and limbs. The stagecoach lurched violently. Inside, the woman shrieked. Another shot rang out. This one shattered the window of the coach door. The screams from within were cut short, replaced by a choked, horrified gasp. The sight broke Jake's paralysis. He fired the Winchester bucking against his shoulder. His shot was true, catching one of the riders in the chest and sending him tumbling from his saddle. The other three returned fire, splintering the wood around him. He ducked, levering another round into the chamber. But the damage was done. His hesitation had cost them everything. Two of the outlaws dismounted, one keeping Jake pinned down, while the other wrenched open the coach door. Jake heard the mother's desperate pleas, the sound of a struggle. He risked a glance. The outlaw was tearing the silver locket from the little girl's neck. Alara wasn't moving. A dark crimson stain was spreading across the front of her simple dress. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing. A wave of nausea and fury washed over Jake, so potent it threatened to drown him. He rose from his cover, firing with a cold, mechanical rage. He hit another rider in the arm, sending him scrambling back to his horse. The leader, clutching the strongbox and the locket, vaulted onto his mount. "Let's go," he yelled. And they were gone, swallowed by the canyons as quickly as they had appeared, leaving behind a wake of silence, death, and the choking smell of gunpowder. Jake stood motionless, the rifle hanging limply in his hand. The quiet that returned was heavier, more profound than before. It was the quiet of failure. Silas was slumped over the driver's seat, a dark patch on his back. Inside the coach, the mother was holding her daughter, her body racked with silent, convulsive sobs that made no sound. Jake walked to the coach door, his boots feeling like lead. He looked at the lifeless face of the little girl, her expression one of placid surprise. And he saw clear as day the face of the child who had been standing next to Donovan in St. Louis. Another innocent life caught in the wake of his violence. The silver locket was gone, but its absence was a brand on Jake's soul, a permanent symbol of a debt he could never repay. He had run to the farthest corners of the earth to escape his past, only to find it waiting for him in the heart of the Arizona desert. 6 months later, the dust of the canyon had settled, but the dust in Jake's soul had not. He had traded his rifle for a shovel, his life as a guard for a self-imposed exile, on a patch of unforgiving land, nestled in the shadow of the Dragoon Mountains. The ranch was a reflection of his spirit, neglected, broken, and gasping for life. The fences sagged like tired old men, the well ran slow, and the small adobe house seemed to shrink under the vast, indifferent sky. He worked from sunup to sundown, a relentless, punishing rhythm designed to exhaust his body, so his mind would have no energy left to remember. But memories were persistent weeds. In the oppressive silence of the night, the image of Alara's vacant eyes and the ghost of a stolen silver locket would return to haunt him. He had reported the robbery, the men described the locket. The sheriff had listened with weary sympathy, but in a territory this vast justice was a rare and fickle thing. The outlaws were never found. One blistering afternoon, as Jake was trying to coax water from the near dry well, he saw a dust cloud on the horizon. It was slow-moving, singular, not a posse, not bandits. As it drew closer, it resolved into a buckboard wagon driven by a man from the nearest town, Benson. Beside him sat a woman. Jake straightened, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of a calloused hand. He felt a knot of irritation tighten in his stomach. He hadn't had a visitor in months and wanted none. He watched as the wagon pulled up to the edge of his property. The driver tipped his hat. "This is it, ma'am. Thorn Ranch," the driver said, his voice carrying on the dry air. The woman paid him, and then turned her attention to the dilapidated ranch. She was not what he would have expected. Her dress was plain but well made. Her hair was pinned up with a severe neatness, and she held herself with a straight-backed posture that seemed utterly at odds with her surroundings. She stepped down from the wagon, carrying a single sturdy suitcase. As the buckboard rumbled away, she walked toward him, her steps measured and deliberate. She did not falter on the uneven ground. Her eyes a startling shade of blue took in the broken fence, the parched garden, and finally, Jake himself. There was no pity in her gaze, only a calm, unnerving assessment. "Mr. Jacob Thorne," she asked. Her voice was clear and educated with an eastern crispness that was as foreign here as a spring rain. Jake just stared, his mind struggling to catch up. He had a vague, half-forgotten memory of a drunken night in a Benson saloon months ago, a desperate, lonely act of filling out a form from a matrimonial gazette. He had never expected a response. He had never wanted one. It had been a moment of weakness, a foolish attempt to prove to himself that some part of him still craved a normal life. "Who's asking?" He grunted, his voice rusty from disuse. "My name is Sarah Gable," she said, setting her suitcase down in the dust. "I am your mail-order bride." The words hung in the air between them, absurd and surreal. Jake let out a short, harsh laugh, devoid of humor. "You've made a mistake. There's no bride here. You should have stayed on that wagon." Sarah's expression did not change. "The contract was clear, Mr. Thorne. Passage paid in exchange for marriage and assistance in establishing a home. I have fulfilled my part of the agreement by arriving. I expect you to fulfill yours." "There is no home here," he snapped, gesturing at the decaying ranch. "This is a graveyard, a place where things come to die. Go back to whatever city you came from." "I have no city to go back to," she replied simply. "This is my home now. The contract is legally binding." Her directness was like a splash of cold water. She wasn't pleading or frightened. She was stating facts as if they were discussing the price of flour. He studied her, looking for a crack in her composure, a flicker of the fear or disappointment he expected to see. He found none. She looked back at him, her gaze unwavering, and for the first time in a long time, Jake felt something other than guilt or anger. He felt a profound sense of bewilderment. "You won't last a week." He said the words a challenge and a warning. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "We shall see, Mr. Thorne." She picked up her suitcase when walked past him toward the adobe house, leaving him standing by the well, a solitary figure in a landscape of his own, suddenly feeling as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. The silence he had so carefully cultivated had been broken, and he had a sinking feeling it would never be the same. The first few days were a silent war of attrition. Sarah was a whirlwind of quiet, relentless industry. She did not ask for permission. She simply began to impose order on his chaos. She scrubbed the floors, patched the moth-eaten curtains, and aired out the dusty rooms that had been sealed for years. She tackled the overgrown garden with a ferocity that surprised him, her hands, which he'd assumed were soft and delicate, quickly becoming blistered and raw. She never complained. Jake watched her from a distance, a mixture of resentment and grudging respect churning within him. He offered no help and no encouragement, certain that the brutal reality of the life would break her. He ate the simple meals she prepared in stony silence, answering her attempts at conversation with monosyllabic grunts. "The larder is nearly empty," she said one evening, her voice calm as she cleared the table. "We will need to go into town for supplies." "No money for supplies," he said, not looking at her. "Then we will have to find something to trade," she replied unfazed. "That broken wagon by the barn. Is the ironwork salvageable?" "You have a forge." He looked up, startled. She was observant, too observant. She saw not just the decay, but the potential buried beneath it. Her practicality was a constant, unnerving challenge to his apathy. "The forge hasn't been lit in years," he mumbled. "Then perhaps it is time to light it," she said gently. Her persistence began to wear on him, chipping away at the walls he had so carefully constructed. She asked questions not about his past, not yet, but about the ranch, the land, the reasons things were the way they were. Each question was a small pickaxe against the stone of his solitude. The external world intruded on their tense domesticity a week after her arrival. 2 men on horseback rode up to the ranch. They were not drifters. Their clothes were too clean, their horses too well fed, and they wore their sidearms with an easy professional confidence. Jake met them on the porch, his body instinctively shifting into a defensive stance. The leader, a man with a cruel smile and cold reptilian eyes, dismounted. "Jacob Thorne," he asked, though it wasn't a question. "Name's Calloway. I work for Mr. Blackwood." Jake said nothing. The name Blackwood was known throughout the valley. A wealthy rancher from back east who had been buying up land with a single-minded determination using methods that were often just on the legal side of extortion. "Mr. Blackwood has authorized me to make you a generous offer for this piece of property." Calloway said, his gaze sweeping over the dilapidated ranch with contempt. "He's offering you $500. More than it's worth, but he's a benevolent man." "It's not for sale," Jake said, his voice flat. Calloway's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Everything's for sale, Thorne. Especially a place like this. You're barely scratching a living here. Take the money. Start fresh somewhere else." "I said it's not for sale," Jake repeated, his tone hardening. Calloway's demeanor shifted, the thin veneer of civility vanishing. "Mr. Blackwood doesn't like to be told no. He finds it disagreeable. He gets what he wants. I'd think long and hard about that if I were you. We'll be back." He mounted his horse, and the 2 men rode off, leaving a trail of dust and a palpable sense of menace hanging in the air. Sarah had been watching from the doorway, her face pale but her expression resolute. "Who is Blackwood?" she asked, as Jake came back inside. "A snake who wants to own the whole valley." Jake set his jaw tight. "Will they be back?" "Yes." That night, a brutal dust storm blew in from the plains, a monstrous churning wall of brown that swallowed the sky. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the small house to its foundations. Dust seeped through every crack, coating everything in a fine, gritty film. They worked together, stuffing rags into the gaps around the windows and the door, their movements synchronized by a shared, unspoken urgency. For hours they sat in the dim light of a single lantern as the storm raged outside, the world reduced to the 4 walls of their small shelter. The noise was deafening, the pressure of the wind immense. In the heart of the maelstrom, trapped in the fragile quiet of the house, the distance between them seemed to shrink. "Were you ever a soldier?" Sarah asked, suddenly, her voice barely a whisper above the roar of the wind. The question caught him off guard. "No," he said. "You stand like one," she observed. "And you handle a rifle as if it were part of your own arm. But your eyes, they are not a soldier's eyes." "What are they?" he asked, his voice rough. She looked at him, her blue eyes seeming to see straight through his defenses to the broken man hiding beneath. "They are a hunter's eyes," she said softly. "But I cannot tell if you are the one who is hunting or the one who is being hunted." Her words struck him with the force of a physical blow. She saw him. In a way no one had in years, she saw the truth of him. He said nothing, but in the flickering lantern light, as the storm raged on, a tiny, almost imperceptible crack formed in the fortress around his heart. For the first time, he did not feel entirely alone in his exile. A few weeks later, the supplies had dwindled to near nothing. True to her word, Sarah had helped him repair the old buckboard, and Jake had spent 2 days at the forge, the rhythmic clang of his hammer on hot iron, a sound that was both painful and familiar. He had taken apart the broken wagon and forged a set of sturdy tools and hinges items that would fetch a decent price in town. The trip was necessary, but Jake dreaded it. Town meant people, and people meant judgment. Benson was a single dusty street, lined with wooden storefronts, a weary outpost against the vastness of the desert. As they pulled up to the general store, Jake could feel the eyes on them. On him. His reputation as the town recluse was well established. The sight of him with a woman, a respectable-looking woman at that, was enough to set tongues wagging. Inside the store, the air was thick with the smells of coffee leather and dried herbs. Mr. Henderson, the proprietor, a man whose face was a roadmap of wrinkles, peered at them over his spectacles. "Thorne," he said, his tone a mixture of surprise and suspicion. "Didn't expect to see you?" His eyes slid to Sarah. "Ma'am." "We've come for supplies, Mr. Henderson." Sarah said, her voice calm and clear. She handed him a list. While he gathered the items, she browsed the shelves. Her attention was drawn to a stack of old newspapers used for wrapping. On top of the pile was a yellowed copy of the St. Louis Dispatch, dated over 5 years ago. A headline caught her eye: "Prominent merchant killed in duel gone wrong." Her curiosity piqued. She carefully unfolded the paper. The article detailed a shootout in a public square. A well-known gunslinger, whose name was not printed, had been involved in a dispute that had escalated. In the ensuing chaos, a local merchant named Elias Donovan had been struck by a stray bullet and killed. The gunslinger had vanished in the aftermath, wanted for questioning. The name Donovan lodged in her mind. It meant nothing to her, but she had a strange feeling, a premonition, that this piece of the past was important. She discreetly folded the article and tucked it into her reticule. Their business concluded, they were about to leave when a man stepped into the store, blocking the doorway. He was immaculately dressed in a tailored black coat and polished boots, a stark contrast to the dusty denizens of Benson. His hair was silver at the temples, and his face was handsome in a severe, aristocratic way. But it was his eyes that held Sarah's attention, and they were intelligent, calculating, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Mr. Thorne," the man said, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone that dripped with condescension. "I had heard you'd acquired some company. I am Marcus Blackwood." Jake's body went rigid. He positioned himself slightly in front of Sarah, a protective instinct he hadn't felt in years surging to the surface. "What do you want, Blackwood?" Blackwood smiled, a predatory curving of his lips. "Merely to welcome your lovely companion to our humble valley. It is a harsh place, madam. It has a tendency to break things that are not strong enough to endure it." His gaze lingered on Sarah for a moment before returning to Jake. "My offer for your land still stands, Thorne. In fact, seeing your new responsibilities, I might even be persuaded to increase it. A man must provide, after all, and some debts simply must be paid one way or another. It is a matter of family honor." He spoke the words with a casual elegance, but they were laced with threat. As he turned to leave, a glint of silver at his waistcoat caught Sarah's eye. It was a locket hanging from a fine chain. It was intricately carved with the image of a soaring eagle, identical in every detail to the one the sheriff had described from the stagecoach robbery. Her blood ran cold. The connection was instantaneous, undeniable, and terrifying. Blackwood was not just a land-hungry rancher. He was tied to the very tragedy that had driven Jake into this desolate wilderness. But why? What did the death of a little girl and the theft of her locket have to do with this man and his obsession with Jake's land? As Blackwood walked away, Sarah looked at Jake. He was staring after the man, his face a mask of cold fury. But beneath the anger, she saw something else, a flicker of haunted recognition. She realized then that their fight was not just against a greedy neighbor. They were caught in a web far older and more complex then she could have imagined a web of vengeance that had followed Jake across the country and had now finally found him. The encounter with Blackwood changed everything. The unspoken tension on the ranch was replaced by a shared sense of siege. Blackwood's cryptic words about debts and family honor echoed in the silence between them. Sarah felt the weight of the secrets. She now held the newspaper article and the chilling image of the silver locket. She didn't know how the pieces fit, but she knew they formed a picture of mortal danger. Blackwood's campaign of intimidation escalated. One morning, Jake found their small herd of cattle gone, the fence cut cleanly. A few days later, the water from the well began to taste foul, and they discovered a dead coyote bloating in the depths, a clear act of sabotage. Each incident was designed to wear them down, to make life on the ranch untenable. But the pressure had an unintended effect. Instead of breaking them apart, it forged them together. They worked side by side, repairing the fence, devising a system to haul clean water from a distant stream. Their conversations became more frequent, born of necessity. The gruff, silent man began to recede, and in his place was someone watchful, determined, and fiercely protective. One evening, as Jake was cleaning his Winchester on the porch, Sarah saw him pause to unlock a small wooden chest he kept under his cot. From it, he pulled a gun belt and a holster, holding a Colt Peacemaker with an ivory grip. The gun was a beautiful, deadly thing, perfectly balanced and meticulously maintained. He strapped it on the leather, creaking in the twilight. It settled on his hip with a familiarity that spoke of a long and bloody history. Seeing the weapon back where it belonged was like watching a ghost return to its body. The farmer was gone. The gunslinger was back. That night, Sarah knew she could not keep her silence any longer. The threat was no longer abstract. It was at their door. She waited until he came inside the Colt, a dark presence on his hip. She had the newspaper article in her hand. "Jake," she said, her voice steady, "we need to talk." He looked at her, his eyes wary. She unfolded the fragile paper and placed it on the table between them. "I found this in town. It speaks of a shooting in St. Louis. A merchant named Elias Donovan was killed." Jake's face went pale beneath his tan. The muscles in his jaw clenched so tightly she could see them bunching. "That has nothing to do with this." "Doesn't it?" She pressed gently, her heart pounding. Blackwood spoke of debts and family honor. And he was wearing a locket, Jake. A silver locket with an eagle just like the one stolen from the little girl on the stagecoach. He flinched as if she had struck him. He sank onto a chair, the weight of the past, finally crushing his resistance. He stared at the table, at his calloused hands, at anything but her. "Please, Jake," she whispered, her voice filled with an empathy that surprised them both. "I can't help you if I don't understand what we're fighting against." Who was Donovan? The silence stretched thick and heavy. When he finally spoke, his voice was a raw, broken rasp. He was an innocent man. There was a card game, a cheater. I called him out. He drew on me in the street. It was crowded. He stopped swallowing hard. I was faster. I was always faster. But the crowd... Someone bumped my arm. My shot went wide. It hit Donovan. He was just standing there. He had a son with him, a little boy. He looked up at her, then his eyes filled with a raw, bottomless ocean of guilt. I destroyed a family, Sarah. For nothing. For a stupid card game. I ran. I ran from the law, from his ghost, from myself. I came out here to disappear, to pay for what I did by living in this hell. "And the stagecoach?" she asked softly. When that outlaw aimed his gun, I saw Donovan's face. He confessed, his voice cracking. I hesitated. "And that little girl?" She paid the price for my cowardice. It was St. Louis all over again. Another innocent life lost because of me. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, not of pity, but of profound understanding. This was the source of his pain and the wound that had festered in solitude for so long. He was not a monster. He was a man haunted by a single catastrophic mistake. She reached across the table and for the first time placed her hand over his. His hand was trembling. "You are not that man anymore, Jake," she said, her voice firm. "You are not a coward. A coward would have taken Blackwood's money and run again. You stayed. You are fighting." His fingers curled around hers, his grip surprisingly tight. It was a silent acknowledgement, a desperate anchor in a storm of grief. In that moment, the last of the walls between them crumbled. They were no longer a reclusive rancher and his mail-order bride. They were partners bound by a shared threat and a dawning fragile trust. Their moment of connection was shattered by a sudden violent roar from outside. A flicker of orange light danced against the window pane. They rushed to the door. The barn was engulfed in flames, the fire a hungry beast devouring the dry timber, casting terrifying dancing shadows across the yard. Silhouetted against the inferno were 3 riders. Calloway was one of them. "Blackwood sends his final offer," Thorne Calloway yelled over the crackle of the fire. "The deed to your land, or she pays your debt." Before Jake could react, 2 of the men charged the porch. He shoved Sarah back inside and drew the Colt, the motion fluid and instantaneous. He fired twice, the gun roaring in the night. One of the men grunted and fell, but the other was already on him. They crashed to the floor, a tangle of limbs and fury. Jake fought with the desperation of a cornered animal, but Calloway's man was strong. As they grappled, Sarah grabbed a heavy iron skillet from the hearth. With a cry of rage, she brought it down on the man's head. He slumped unconscious. But the reprieve was momentary. Calloway, using the distraction, had circled around to the back. The back door burst open. He grabbed Sarah from behind, pressing the cold barrel of a pistol to her temple. "Drop the gun," Thorne Calloway snarled, dragging Sarah out into the fiery yard. "Or the lady gets it." Jake's blood ran cold. He stood his chest, heaving, his Colt aimed at Calloway. The scene was a nightmare tableau, the burning barn, the acrid smoke, and Sarah, her face stark with fear, held hostage by the man who was destroying their lives. "Mr. Blackwood wants to see you," Calloway said, his cruel smile illuminated by the flames. A final settlement. The old San Miguel mission. At dawn, come alone. If you're not there, well, I'm sure he'll find a use for her. He shoved Sarah toward his horse, tied her hands, and threw her over the saddle. With a final mocking salute, he and his remaining man spurred their horses and disappeared into the darkness, leaving Jake alone amidst the ruins of his home, the fire casting a hellish glow on his face. The choice had been made for him. He was done running. The hunt was over. Now he was the hunter. The ride to the San Miguel mission was a journey through a gathering purgatory. The sky, once a canvas of pre-dawn stars, was now bruised and swollen with storm clouds. A low, ominous rumble echoed through the canyons, a prelude to the violence to come. Jake rode hard, his body a coiled spring of cold, focused rage. The man he had tried to bury for 5 years was now fully in control, his senses sharp, his purpose clear. He wasn't just riding to save Sarah. He was riding toward his own reckoning. The mission stood on a high mesa, a skeletal ruin against the turbulent sky. Its adobe walls were crumbling, and the great bell tower was a jagged stump struck by lightning years ago. It was a place of ghosts, a fitting stage for the final act. As Jake approached, the first drops of rain began to fall fat and heavy, kicking up little puffs of dust from the parched ground. He dismounted, leaving his horse in a copse of mesquite, and approached the mission on foot, the colt a comforting weight in his hand. He moved with a predator's silence, using the crumbling archways and shadowed alcoves for cover. He could hear voices from within the main chapel, where the roof had long since collapsed, leaving it open to the angry sky. He peered through a crack in the wall. Blackwood was there, standing by the ruined altar. He was as impeccably dressed as ever, seemingly unbothered by the growing storm. Sarah was tied to a thick wooden pillar, her face pale but her eyes blazing with defiance. Calloway and one other thug stood guard. "I knew you would come." Thorne Blackwood called out, his voice echoing in the ruined space. He hadn't seen Jake, but he knew he was there. A man will always return to the scene of his crimes, won't he? Jake stepped out from the shadows, his gun leveled. "Let her go, Blackwood. This is between you and me." Blackwood chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Oh, it has always been between you and me. She is merely the catalyst, the means to ensure your attendance." A brilliant fork of lightning split the sky, followed by a deafening crash of thunder. In the flash of stark white light, Jake saw the silver locket hanging from Blackwood's waistcoat. The eagle seemed to mock him. "The locket," Jake said, his voice low and dangerous. "The stagecoach, my cattle, my home, all of it, just to get my attention." "Attention," Blackwood sneered. "No, this is not for attention. This is for justice. This is for a debt of blood." He gave a subtle nod. Calloway and the other man opened fire. Jake dove behind a pile of rubble as bullets chewed into the adobe wall where he'd been standing. The storm broke in earnest, then the rain coming down in a driving torrential sheet. The shootout became a chaotic dance in the downpour. Thunder masked the sound of gunshots. Flashes of lightning provided brief, terrifying moments of illumination. Jake moved with lethal grace, a phantom in the storm. He took out the second thug with a clean shot to the shoulder. Calloway, enraged, charged him, firing wildly. Jake used the chaos, the wind and rain, to his advantage, flanking him. In a close, brutal exchange, Calloway went down. Now it was just him and Blackwood. Blackwood had not moved from the altar. He held a small, elegant derringer in his hand, but he made no move to fire it. He simply watched, an unnerving calm on his face. "You're fast, Thorne. I'll give you that," Blackwood said, his voice cutting through the roar of the storm. "You were fast in St. Louis, too." Jake advanced slowly, his Colt's steady rein plastering his hair to his skull. "You know about St. Louis?" "Know about it?" Blackwood's voice rose, cracking with a sudden raw emotion that ripped through his polished facade. "I was there. I was the boy standing beside my father when your stray bullet tore his life away." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The cryptic remarks, the obsession, the name Donovan. Elias Donovan. Was my father. Blackwood spat, his face contorted with years of suppressed grief and hatred. "My name is Marcus Donovan Blackwood. I took my mother's name to escape the shame you brought upon us. You destroyed my family. You took everything from me. I spent years searching for you, and when I found you hiding on that pathetic ranch, I vowed I would take everything from you. Your land, your hope, your life." The stagecoach attack suddenly made a new monstrous kind of sense. The little girl. Jake breathed, horrified. "Unnecessary cruelty," Blackwood said coldly. "I needed to see if you were still the same reckless killer, to see if you still had a soul left. Your hesitation that day told me everything. You were haunted. Good. I wanted you to suffer to feel the same helplessness I felt as I watched my father die in the mud." He raised the derringer. Now that debt will be paid. But Jake was faster. The colt roared, and the derringer flew from Blackwood's hand. Jake crossed the space between them in 3 long strides and slammed Blackwood against the stone altar, the barrel of his gun pressed under the man's chin. He had him. He could end it. For Sarah. For Alara. For the years of running. Revenge was a hot, sweet poison in his veins. He could pull the trigger, and it would all be over. His finger tightened. He looked into Blackwood's eyes, and he didn't see a monster. He saw a broken boy twisted by grief who had grown into a man defined by vengeance. He saw a mirror of his own life, a life consumed by a single, violent moment. The flashback from the stagecoach returned, but this time it was different. He saw Donovan fall. He saw the boy Blackwood scream, and he saw his own face, young and arrogant, realizing the catastrophic, irreversible nature of his mistake. Killing Blackwood wouldn't fix it. It would only continue the cycle. It would make him the very thing Blackwood believed him to be. With a ragged cry that was torn from the depths of his soul, Jake lowered the gun. He stepped back, his chest heaving. No, he gasped the word tasting of rain and absolution. No more. The debt is mine, but I won't pay it with another killing. Blackwood stared at him, his expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. At that moment, the sound of galloping horses reached them. The sheriff, alerted by a rider Sarah had managed to send before the final attack, burst into the mission ruins with a posse of deputies. They took in the scene, the bodies, the burning barn visible in the distance, and Jake standing over a disarmed and defeated Blackwood. Justice had finally arrived. But it was not the justice of the gun. It was the justice of a choice. The choice to end the violence, not perpetuate it. As the deputies hauled Blackwood away, his face a mask of stunned fury, Sarah ran to Jake. He wrapped his arms around her, holding on as if she were the only solid thing in a world that had just been torn apart and remade. The storm began to subside, and through a break in the clouds, the first clean light of dawn broke over the horizon. The weeks that followed were a time of quiet rebuilding. The charred skeleton of the barn was a constant reminder of the violence they had survived, but it was also a monument to their resilience. News of Blackwood's confession, his true identity as Marcus Donovan, and his long-plotted revenge spread through the valley. The fear he had instilled in the small ranchers dissipated, replaced by a newfound respect for the reclusive man on the Thorn Ranch. Neighbors who had once shunned Jake now arrived with lumber tools and offers of help. They raised a new barn, its fresh pine scent a promise of a new beginning. Sarah orchestrated the work with a quiet efficiency, her presence a source of calm and strength. She and Jake worked side by side, speaking little but communicating in the shared language of labor and understanding. The wounds of the past were still there, but for the first time they felt like scars, not open sores. One cool evening, long after the last of the helpers had gone home, Jake stood before the glowing heart of his forge. The ranch was quiet, the only sounds the chirp of crickets and the soft sigh of the bellows. Sarah stood in the doorway of the forge, watching him, her arms crossed. She knew what he was about to do. He walked into the house and returned with the ivory-gripped Colt Peacemaker. He held it for a long moment, the weapon feeling both alien and intimately familiar in his hand. It was a symbol of everything he had been: the speed, the violence, the reputation, the mistake. It was the tool that had both made his name and destroyed his life. With a steady hand, he placed the gun into the searing coals. He pumped the bellows, and the fire roared greedily, licking at the polished steel. They watched in silence as the metal began to glow, first a dull red, then a bright, angry orange, and finally, a shimmering, almost liquid cherry. The elegant, deadly shape began to warp and lose its form, the lines of the barrel and cylinder melting into an unrecognizable lump of potential. Taking a pair of long tongs, Jake pulled the incandescent mass from the fire and placed it on the anvil. He picked up his heaviest hammer. The first blow rang out sharp and clear in the night air, sending a shower of sparks into the darkness. It was a sound of destruction, but also of creation. He struck it again and again, his rhythm steady and powerful. He was not just hammering a piece of metal. He was beating out the ghosts of his past, transforming the instrument of his sin into something new. He worked for over an hour, the sweat glistening on his forehead, his muscles straining. The lump of steel slowly took on a new shape under his relentless hammer. It was no longer a weapon. When he was finished, he plunged it into the quenching barrel, a violent hiss of steam erupting into the cool night. He pulled the object from the water. It was a hinge, a simple, sturdy, beautifully crafted door hinge. It was thick and strong, designed to bear a great weight, to open and to close, to secure and to welcome. He walked over to the newly built gate at the entrance to their ranch, and the one that opened onto the road leading to the rest of the world. He took down the temporary wooden latch and with careful precision fitted the new hinge. It moved with a smooth, solid grace. He turned to Sarah, who had followed him. Her face was illuminated by the moonlight, and there were tears in her eyes. He reached out and gently wiped one away with his thumb, his hand rough and stained with soot. They stood together at the gate, looking out at the vast, star-dusted expanse of their land. The past was not gone. The graves of Elias Donovan and a little girl named Ilara would forever be a part of him. But it no longer had the power to define his future. He had faced his ghosts, and by choosing mercy over vengeance, had finally set himself free. This land was no longer his exile. It was his home, and he was no longer alone. He had a partner, a woman whose strength had shown him the way back to himself. The gate held by a hinge forged from a broken past was now open to a new life.